Good morning, and welcome back to Jack's Coffee Break. So last week, we talked about refurbishing old habitats, and in that one we were over in my randomizer zoo. Today we are stepping back and we're looking at a different zoo. So this is going to be one of my desert zoos. This one is not randomized, but it does have some interesting things going on with it that probably need a couple of corrections. And so this is what I want to talk about today, is refurbishing old zoos, and instead of focusing just on the habitats, which, are relatively contained, we're going to be talking about two aspects of refurbishing a zoo on the whole. The first one is to be fixing green areas or dead space areas, places where your guests are going to go, but where no habitat takes up their viewing space. The other thing that we're going to talk about is dealing with a change in heart, a change in theme, and implementing that into your design. Everybody say hi to Oliver. He would like to beep and let everybody know that he's still here and that he still has opinions about me recording. I've moved back into my room for a little while just because we have guests, and he has definitely taken notice and would like to tell everybody about the fact that I have not fed him today. So, with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about what is going right with this zoo and what's going wrong with this zoo. So, first things first, I want to talk about this region over here. So, we've got a lot of this black Oceania rock, and we're contrasting it with this very, pale white plaster. And so it's giving us a very striking look that complements the greenery of the area quite nicely. And this is based off of a reference photo. A few months back, I think a zoo in, I don't know if it was a San Diego zoo or one of the other ones that I was looking at, has announced plans to refurbish a sea lion habitat. And so this is roughly based off of their same concept art. I did my own twist with it because, of course, I'm working with concept art. And I've rather enjoyed building it. It was a nice, fun annex, but it does some things that this upper level of the zoo does not do. And that, quite frankly, I think the newer area does much better. So let's go down into explore mode real quick, and let me show you what I'm talking about. So first things first, we have very clear theming. We know exactly what our colors are going to be like. We know that we're contrasting black and white with greens and blues, and then we're letting the animals kind of speak for themselves. We have large areas where, like, I have, this little statuary space. And this is to show off, this is sort of based off of a region in the Pacific Ocean that's a little bit warmer, a bit more tropical over in Asia. And so this is in reference to a set of islands where marine iguanas like to congregate up on the rocks. And so because of the fact that we can't have free-roaming iguanas, this was kind of my next best option. And then, of course, this leads you over into the seal habitat and the marine iguanas. Or sorry, sea lion habitat, I should say. So, we've got this little buffer area. I don't normally do these, but it's actually been quite nice to work with. Gives us a nice bit of space, lets guests view into the water without any kind of risk of them falling in. We do have the glass exposed. I don't mind doing this with the glass barriers so much. I think it looks okay. We could potentially upgrade to the thicker glass, but because I'm doing this in, I want to say I'm doing this in franchise, if not challenge. I definitely have a budget, so it's one or the other. So having these kind of barriers are sort of a necessity in order to get this water to work. And then over here, which this sign is actually wrong, but over here we have our dwarf caimans. So the idea is that this entire space makes a loop, so I'm just going to run through it a little bit faster. Need to have somebody come through and clean this up. This would be an aquarium if we had working fish, but we don't. And then this takes you down into the underwater viewing areas for both the caimans and for our seals over here. And so we have a lot of viewing areas. I've done my best to kind of decorate this with sort of the budget and the space that we have. Of course, anytime that you decorate with rocks, it's going to remove some of their swim space. So I've done my best to try and keep these sort of loopy things, which I think they use. And then this takes you back up through here. And then we sort of see into the flaws, because it just sort of dumps you into an area with absolutely nothing. A staff access, which is all the way up there, and takes you back around into what's supposed to be this nice, really well-furbished green area. So if I were to take any particular piece of this zoo today and work on it, I think that I would start with this one. And this is not difficult to deal with. We'd simply make, a simple rock wall, cover this through, and then make sure that we have our little access right here. Maybe add some greenery, and then maybe add a little bit of an education board or something like that in order to sort of maintain the feeling of this habitat through and through. Because right now it sort of feels like everything sort of ends right now, and it's very ugly. So this is an area where I would individually focus on. Now let's look at the big picture, and let's take what we've seen over here and apply it to over here. First thing you notice is that we have extreme density. So this is something that I tend to do whenever I start up a new zoo, is that I put everything very close together, because I want my guests, who are not expecting to walk very far and don't have a lot of expectations, to see as much as they can before I have to do things like add in new areas for like concession stands and bathrooms and staff facilities. Basically, if I can keep things in these tight little neighborhoods when I start off, then it relieves a lot of the stress of expanding until I'm in a more financially stable space. And that works great for the temporary, but the result is often that I end up having to come through and completely dismantle these sorts of areas and rework them entirely. One of the things that you'll notice is that all of my habitats are basically boxes, and this can work for a little while, depending on the style and the theme that you're going for. But I personally would like to move most of these animals to a more organic space unless there's like a specific reason why a box is ideal. For example, badgers tend to do really well in these sort of box style habitats, I find, simply because they're so small that having a narrow window in which to view a wider habitat actually tends to work pretty well for getting the best viewing out of these animals. However, for other animals, for example, over here, we have, I believe, a clouded leopard, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see if I can go find her real quick. So for some reason, my clouded leopard habitat is empty, so this would actually, as disappointing as it is, this would be an ideal time for me to go through and refurbish this habitat. But as you can see, we have this kind of U-bend to it. It's more of an L-bend. Maybe a Christmas stocking. I think a Christmas stocking describes this the best. But it's a very thin, narrow space, and you'll notice that a lot of it is not viewable. We sort of have this platform area right here that allows us to view this specific section of the habitat, makes it look really well decorated, and then the moment that you get out of it, it's sort of dead, wasted space. There's not a lot of intrigue, and more importantly, there's not a lot going on for the clouded leopard. He can either hide over in this little corner over here, or he can be on stage, and it certainly works, but it's not, I wouldn't call this ideal. There's not a lot of spaces where, like, he can pop out of and be viewed and then go back in. There's no dynamicness to the habitat. So part of this, however, is that if we were to just try and refurbish this habitat as it were, we'd end up with this exact same shape. Because of the fact that we're sort of boxed in on this piece of land, it would be better to move him completely somewhere else, and then use this space to expand on some of our other facilities. So you can see that I've used larger paths through here. This is to help with congestion. And I have decorated it as much as I can with all of these different plants, but it gives the area this extremely crowded feel. And even though we're using the plaster pieces, even though it has this sort of vaguely pseudo-African-ish, not really feel about it, the theming is not really clear. Like, we have ideas, but none of them are cohesive, and they're not coming together in an attractive or appealing way. And so these are all things that I would like to refurbish about this habitat. So, or rather, this region up here. And so I think instead, because we have so much plaster, and because plaster is so easy to retool, it makes more sense for us to expand on this kind of style through here. Either we continue this style down into sort of an aquatic area, or we continue it throughout the entire zoo, and then we make alterations as is required for the specific theming that we're doing. So those are kind of the things that I'm thinking about right now. So I think because the first thing that I know for a fact that I want to do is I want to upgrade this little area through here, I'm going to focus on that because we know that we don't need an extension back here. It just doesn't make sense with the layout of our zoo. It makes more sense for us to get back there organically. We do have a decent amount of space, so it is worth considering, but quite frankly, I don't want to go up to the border with this. I've already kind of made that mistake through here. And we'll talk about how to correct that in a little while. But for right now, I'm going to go ahead and refurbish this, and then I will come back. Okay, so we are back in now. So if I go into free look mode, no, not free look, sorry, explorer mode, I don't want to select this rock. So apparently I was using the faux rocks before the Oceanio pack came out, so the rocks are going to look a little bit different in tone, but honestly I think it's fine. So I've just decorated it up a little bit. I could probably put some kind of like round door right here, but I think it's enough of a separator that if we do something like a hedgerow over here or something, it's going to be okay. But I think that this wall sort of helps to direct traffic, makes it feel a little bit like you've just wandered into a dead space area. So it helps to keep everything sort of unified. So I think that this works just fine, and then again we're pulling in elements from over here with the collection of what I'm considering to be marine iguanas and Galapagos sea lions for the purposes of this sort of exhibit through here. So it's just a very simple example of like taking one little corner, one little space where things don't quite feel right yet and just sort of working on them. And this is normally what I will do. I find little corners where I think that I want to upgrade something or I want to remodel it, and then I'll just take a little bit of time and spend it all in one particular little area. I find that once you have the confines down, everything feels a lot less overwhelming because instead of expending a lot of your time building wide and quickly in order to have something down, you can focus on just one specific region and then make that look really good. So, of course, the next thing that we could probably talk about is going to be what are we going to do as far as like layout bits. Because yeah, we've got this little section remodeled. It didn't take us very long, but we're going to end up having thousands of those, hopefully not thousands, dozens of those, I'm going to say dozens, once we actually get to remodeling. So, you know, if we're going to bring in this Galapagos style theming, then we have to account for the fact that a lot of our animals are not going to be Galapagos animals, obviously. And we have a lot of different items that are already reflecting different regions. So this whole area up here, I've got a lot of desert brush. And so this sort of begs the question, do we want to keep this all sort of deserty and then blend our architectural styles together so that way we have different feeling regions, but we don't have same all the way through? I think for this particular zoo, something like that is going to work. So what we need to do as well is we need to figure out what is our land allocation. In this case, we have this specific border, so everything through here is going to be one regional border. And then we need to decide what we want to keep on this ridge and what we want to move south. So, as mentioned before, this exhibit for our cat is not very good, and there's no good way to expand it to make it look good either. Of course, the other thing is that based off of the different biome features I have in here, makes me wonder if it wasn't actually, like, maybe this was a... I don't know if this was a clouded leopard or what kind of leopard it was, I just know it was a cat. So maybe this would be better suited for moving it to more of a cold desert taiga feeling area. So maybe this is something that we save for a different region, you know, and we focus this space on more of our hot tropic loving animals. So for example, we might maybe move our badgers. Here we've got our cougar. Our cougar would be perfectly fine in this area. So I think probably he can stay up here, but probably moved a little bit farther away from the entrance. Over here we have pronghorns. They make a lot of sense over in this region as well for kind of similar reasons. They do go down into more arid regions of the Americas. And they will tolerate desert and grasslands. We simply need to retool the habitat for that. And so this is kind of what I'll do, is I'll figure out what each animal is that I have, and I'll figure out whether or not they need to stay or go. So for example, right now I have these Aldopter giant tortoises. These are more native to the Seychelles, and so it would make more sense maybe for them to move over to this region, because even though this area right here is focused more on like Galapagos and South America, the climate makes more sense for them. So maybe the turtles or something else that I'm going to move. So we'll move our cat, we'll move our turtles, and this will free up a significant amount of space. Probably about an eighth or a 12th of our region. And this will actually give us a lot of room to expand for several of our other animals. For example, our cougar could use a lot more room and a lot less box. And so could our pronghorns. You know, if we want to have a proper herd, maybe we want to bring in some buffalo, they're definitely going to need more space. So this is where I'm going to go ahead and start moving some of these animals into the trade center, and then we will look at removing these habitats and then beginning our retool, trying to figure out where we're going to migrate things to. So I am going to cut away for that, and then I will bring you in for the interesting bits. Alrighty, so we have gone ahead and removed those habitats, and as you can see, the space is already a lot more open. If I were to directly replace either of these spaces of land, I would probably move this to be some kind of food station. Move this away from just being a corner wall thing, and move this to be a food station, and then consider using this as a ramp. And then over here I would probably put horses. This looks like a great place for like Przewalskis. However, for right now, what we really need to consider as well is that while we have this rather beautiful walkthrough area that I really do quite like, and I feel like losing it would lose something about the region, it is also, regardless of what we end up using this space for, it's going to be boxed in by what's happening over here. So let's talk about what's happening in this center area right through here. The first thing that we have is a food court. This is a fairly nice design for a food court. I'm quite happy with it in terms of what the layout is doing. I'm not necessarily happy with it in terms of color, in terms of decoration. And so these are areas where, again, I would probably turn my attentions towards making this feel better. It acts as a really nice gateway out into the rest of the park, while also supplying a decent amount of food and cover. I'd probably add a little bit of like vines and greenery, and this is the first time I've ever seen the moon in this game. Huh. I didn't know there was a moon. You know, I've played this game for 3 years, and it's blue. Fascinating. Anyway, hello dear. Anyway, I would probably do this up with maybe some vines, some kind of coverage, and I like these little wall lights, but I think that maybe there's something else that we could do. And then use the walls for decoration space, maybe paint some kind of murals with it. So there's a lot that I think this building has for potential, but right now its position in relation to everything else that's going on is very cramped, it's very awkward. So if I want to keep this space through here, then I need to turn my attention towards what's going on outside of that. So we have our staff area, and then this staff area is hooked up to our, I believe these are our Galapagos, yes. So again, much like the Aldabras, I will probably end up moving our Galapagos over to our Galapagos region. That feels a lot more sensible. And I believe over here I forgot to show you that we have otters. Sweetie, we are beeping. We are beeping in the middle of recording. The boy demands love, so I can't move my mouse right now to show you guys. But anyway, I would probably move those Galapagos over into our Galapagos region, and that will free up a significant amount of space in the center. And then the other thing that we have over there are going to be, I think they're wallabies, which do make sense for a desert area. They don't make sense in the context of the number of North American animals that we have up on this ridge. But I don't think that that's necessarily a concern. If we're showing off specific environments, then something a little bit more arid, and then we show the different flavors of like an arid region, that could be pretty good. So I think that I want to make sure that we have space for our Roo run, but we don't necessarily want it walled up against here, right? Again, right here we have this nice little green space alcove that I'm quite happy with, which is very tightly boxed in against our armadillos over here and our wallabies over here, who can quite nicely be moved. So the last thing that we have are all of these different little boxed out areas for our exhibit animals. And these I think can, for the most part, stay. It feels a little bit too easy to have an island area that's next to a reptile house. It just feels a little bit too simple. And I like the fact that our exhibit animals are sort of out here in the open. I really enjoy that as sort of like a walk-through museum exhibit in the outdoors. Which is oftentimes how I think about these things. So it may be more that we keep these as incidental buildings that we spread out through this area. So instead of adding a ton of new animals right now, we're going to go ahead and focus on moving the animals that we already have. And then we'll remove the space that we managed to free up, and this will give us a little bit more room in order to unclutter this central area. And the reason why I want to do that is because our zoo entrance is in this sort of standard-looking modern America building. And while we are in America, we're in South America in Patagonia. This style of building doesn't make sense for anything that we're doing here. And so if we open up this central space, it will give us a better opportunity to build a new zoo entrance. And I think that that will be our ultimate goal. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of moving our animals, setting them up some kind of temporary exhibit for us to focus on later, and then after that we will come back. Alrighty, so we've done a little bit more cleaning up, and as you can see, this internal space is already a lot more open. We have more room to play. We could essentially turn this into one big exhibit if we wanted to, but of course we don't. I did leave up this little wall right through here simply because I haven't decided what I'm going to do with it yet. There are some little decorations, some modifications that can be interesting in the future. For example, these little tent rods right here, that I do rather quite like as sort of a theme going forward. We've already seen them over here as well, just to keep some of the sun off of the guests. But for now, I think what we should focus on is talking about staff layout. So, I already have an entire video about staff and everything that they do, in case you ever get curious about, like, you know, what am I paying these people for? What is the game not telling me? I will tell you though that video is like an hour long, so use it as like a specific reference if you're going to at all, if it's information that appeals to you. It's mostly useful for new players. I don't think that older veterans are going to get a lot out of it, but I've been proven wrong before. So right now we are looking at how we've laid out our staff building. So we have the central one. As you can tell, this is where I started. I put down this little habitat right here, this little habitat right here, put down a little bit of guest supplementaries, and then put down my staff buildings over here, where they were relatively out of the way and I figured that I could expand to. Unfortunately, I've expanded to engulf this entire region. Now, as far as I remember, yes, this is correct, our negative guest impact is small enough with this building that we're not really bothering any of our crowds, which is good. What we are doing, however, is we're sort of overlapping territories. So right back through here, you can see that I've got a research center, I've got my quarantine, mechanic research, and the research stuff can all remain sort of back in the corner, that's fine. The quarantine, however, really needs to be with our vet, because those two things work in tandem. We also have our staff building and our keeper building, and these are actually really close to our other staff and keeper. So ideally what we want to do is we want to move probably this area right here, or at the very least this quarantine building. We want to migrate it into this unit, and then I think that this unit would be best served right in this space instead of us doing another like guest stop. Because again, we have a big one right here, and we've got a small one right over here, and then an even smaller one over here. So let's go ahead and migrate this out and condense some of these buildings together, so that way we have a little bit more space to work with. And then after that, we'll talk about these two guys. Okay, so now we have all of these different aspects cleared out. Again, this space is really starting to open up. We are now going to have to think about which paths we are and are not going to keep. And this is where things are going to get a little bit harrowing, because we don't have our guests moving down into these other regions quite so much yet. Now, there are a couple of ways that we can draw crowds. We can either focus on adding in different exhibits in order to pull guests away from this region, or we can accept a tank and finances. So there are a couple of ways also to move guests non-destructively. I showed some of these off in the last episode. You basically just turn an area to a staff path, and it tells people get off the path at your earliest convenience. And it's quite nice. However, if you're going to do that, it's going to push them into other regions and cause various forms of overcrowding. You're also going to end up with some disappointed guests. So if you're playing on hard mode, you may end up with refunds, simply because you're removing accessibility from things that people wanted to see. But before we do any of that, let's talk about what we can move non-destructively in terms of our guests. This whole region right through here is essentially wasted space. Now, we could decorate it the way that we have done for all of the other little regions through here, but it doesn't make sense considering the plans that we want to enact. So, let's go ahead and focus on expanding our animals' territory and thinking about new ways for the guests to view these creatures. So I'm going to go ahead and work on refurbishing these real quick. I already did this essentially last time off screen, so if you want to see my guide about how to refurbish an animal habitat, I suggest that you go watch that after this. And then afterwards, I will bring you back in and we will talk about the changes that have been made. Alrighty, so we are back from doing the remodel. So you'll notice that this front end edge hasn't really changed all that much, but the back side of these habitats has like really expanded. So we're now finally going all the way up to the border with our habitats, and this has given our animals a lot more room. In fact, if we go check our badgers, they now have 814 meters. They're no longer like sitting at their 450, so we've pretty much doubled it, given them more space than they will ever truly need, and this is including the decoration. I haven't really gone through and refurbished much about the plant life or anything on the insides of these habitats. I'm just not ready to do that yet. And then for our cougar over here, I've expanded the borders as well, but I've gotten rid of the palm trees and replaced them with these Joshuas. And part of that is because we already have, we're going to have a lot of palms, but we already have a lot of Joshua trees sprinkled throughout here. And these are these are very specific plants. I tend to use them as markers of where we are in the world, especially when we go into a fantasy map, because these are endemic to a specific region of the Mojave. So if you ever see a Joshua tree, it's from the Mojave, because that's where they're from. And likewise, cougars also can live in the Mojave. It felt like a good place to tie this all together. Badgers, of course, these are going to be the European variety, and so I've kept things a little bit more European styled. But if I go back and refurbish any of the greenery, I would like to push this a little bit more because they do have grassland as an option. And right now we're leaning more temperate. So I'd love to be able to push them in that direction as well. But for now, I think the upgrades are good. We've changed a lot of the colors over for the plaster. Again, plaster is really flexible as a material, which means that, a simple color change can completely alter the feeling of a particular area. So the other thing that I'm doing is I'm focusing on these walkways through here. And this is again one of those cases where you need to choose whether or not the guests are NPCs or if they're representing people. Because if they're people, I should not use asphalt under any circumstances. So the other option that I could use is something like the Australian sort of red dirt path. But I know that I don't want to keep this wood boardwalk look through this. It doesn't feel right. So, because I've already come down on the side that the guests are not people, I think I'm going to go ahead and continue the asphalt look as we go through. But the other thing that's sort of unique about this area is that as we sort of push forward, we've got our cougars over here, we've got badgers over here, and we've got our armadillos over here. So it's giving us, between all of that and the Joshua trees, a more North American-centric feeling, where previously I think that I was going for something like, I wanted to set myself up for vaguely African and then didn't stick with it. I found that African architecture is one of the hardest for me to build personally, just because I don't have a lot of experience with it. And here in America, at least, I hate to say it, the propaganda is real. It's real bad. It's hard to find good representations of what different modern, regions look like within specific countries within Africa. So, it's one of these cases where, I think it must be that we're getting filtered based off of languages, because it's like your options are like National Geographic or to go to somebody's like blog. It's really frustrating. So I'm going to go ahead and rework this, I think, towards more of a modern North America feel, like a modern Mojave, and then that way we can continue along with some of these styles, but just make them fit a little bit better with the animals we're going to incorporate. So at this point, we really have two directions we can go in. We can finish dealing with this whole area through here, or we can go ahead and move our entrance. Now, I've been thinking, normally when I move an entrance, I move it away from here, and I'll move it more towards a central area in my zoo. The obvious place to put it would be right here. I did that in my randomizer zoo that I showed off last week. However, I think that this might actually be a better place. It might make a little bit more sense. It'll give us a little bit more room to spread out. And then through here, we might do a centralized roo run. Just thinking either here or here for the roo run. And basically what this would be is, let me go ahead and pull up the wallabies, just so that way you can see. Here we go. So with the recent update, the Barnyard Pack update, we have some changes to animal behavior that I really want to utilize. So relationship with humans for wallabies is confident, and guests can interact with them, which means that we can do basically a walkthrough park, which is something that we could never do before, and I want to take full utilization of that. Now we can't really do that with red kangaroos. We can kind of. Guests can enter their habitats, which is surprising because red kangaroos can be a little bit vicious in real life. You have to really maintain yours. And I think a lot of zoos in real life do a good job of that, getting their roos personable. So we might consider adding red kangaroos through here. It's pretty common. And then that way we can have a proper roo run, and this will give us tons of space to let the guests explore. And I think that that will be really, really cool. So that is something that I think we're going to do with this area. That'll be a little bit easier to do. So instead, I'm going to go ahead and deal with guest entrance. Now this is where I'm going to show a little bit of behind the scenes. I'm not keeping the guest entrance refurbishment in this episode. That's going to be its own tutorial, because entrances are nasty. They're a pain in the butt. I've seen a lot of people who start to build a really beautiful entrance and then completely get burnt out and never finish the zoo. It's a common problem. And this is one of the reasons actually why I don't build an entrance when I start off with. I just let this thing exist. Maybe I'll move it somewhere else. I'll build the zoo out, and then after that I'll come back and build the entrance. So I'm going to go ahead and record that tutorial, and then we will come back and I will show you in context what I've made, and then we will work on our roo run. Okay, so the entrance is done. I love editing magic, it's lovely. So this is it. This is what we're gonna do for an entrance. Like I said, the episode for this will be up next week. Or should do if this comes out on Friday, as I'm expecting it to. So yeah, you can see me build that there. And a couple of the things were it's not completely done, I'm not completely happy with it, but as far as an entrance goes, I think this one's pretty solid, and it sets the tone for how I want to take the rest of the zoo. So that being said, let's go ahead and talk about our roo run, because this is something new that we've only been able to do with the latest patch. So what we have is this giant space of area right here. We have our wallabies, they're in the trade center. And what we need to do now is we need to organize basically where we want this park space to be. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to fix my terrain a little bit. And I'm thinking short grass will probably be just fine for now. We'll transition over back to sand when it's necessary, but we're not there yet. And then the next thing that we need to figure out is where our entrances and exits are going to be. So because of the way that this works, we don't need a real path, which is really cool. I'm going to do a full tutorial on how to do essentially a pseudo pathless zoo. But for now, I do want to have some kind of trail for the guests to follow. So we're probably going to use one of the natural paths in order to get in here. First things first though, we need to set up our barriers. So we have this small guest gate. I think we're going to use that. But first let's set up our knolls. So I'm just going to go around this border edge real quick. We'll figure out where the staff need to come into, and then after that we will add our guest entrances. There we are. So we have the start of our boundary figured out. Let's go ahead and get down our path. Let me make sure that I've got curbs turned on, because I do actually want these. Path supports, curb on, ground path, there we go. So we have the option of this little string thing, or we can do these little plots. I think I'm gonna do the little plots. I think that they're probably just, I don't know, I think they're a little cuter. And the nice thing is that since this is supposed to be like a wander trail, it's okay if we don't do a path of efficiency. So something like that I think looks okay. And then the plan is to set this up so that way the guests can choose how they want to move through this space. So let's go ahead and figure out how we're going to barrier this. That's going to be the next thing. So part of me thinks that we should continue to use some of these plants, but part of me is also aware that not all of these are going to be considered opaque by the ruse. So I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do what I usually do, and I'm going to get in one of the animals, just so that way we can figure out what we're working with. And there's our rue. Alright, so let's figure out what plants they're considering traversable and non-traversable. Looks like my barriers are set up so that way we don't really come into these buffers. What we might end up doing is just a simple wooden fence. I think that that'll probably be good simply because it'll also broadcast to the guests. And then we can incorporate in more of these plants as we want to. Okay, so the border's all done. I did a little bit of editing with the plants just to see if I could incorporate some of them into the barrier. It was kind of 50-50, so I ended up just filling out the entire thing, just to be sure. And none of these plants are considered native to our ruse, but it's not affecting them very much, so I think it'll be okay. So let's go ahead and see what else we can get in here. I definitely want some trees. But beyond that, I don't know. You know what? Let's actually start dealing with their necessary requirements. So the ruse do not like having the sand, but they will tolerate soil. So let's go ahead and replace our pathing material with soil first. And they are going to need some long grass, so let's make some stands of that. And that brings them back in line. Okay. Now they will surprisingly tolerate a baobab tree. It would be very fun to have one of these things, just because I never get to use them. And it would be quite the statement piece. I don't know. Decisions. Honestly, I think maybe let's start with cabbage trees and regular palms, and let's see where it takes us from there. This kind of gives it a prehistorical feeling I kind of like. Oh, and then we have these wild hedgerows, which I've never seen. These are really cool. I didn't know we had these in the game. I like that. Oh, and we have these wattle bushes as well. I think that these might be like really nice ground cover. Just here and there. These king ferns are very cool, but they are enormous. I don't think that they make a whole lot of sense in this situation. But some blue flowers to give the area a little bit of pop, that could be really pretty. And I think they complement really nicely with our crimson turkeys. And maybe let's do just a little bit of this coastal pig face. I think that's nicely planted. Does it fit in with the rest of the area? Actually, pretty well. I like it. So yeah, we'll go ahead and keep that. It's got the right density for the rest of this region. But it gives it a very, like, Jurassic feeling that I'm really liking. Now I know that wallabies are not... I mean, they're anything but a dinosaur, but you know... I can dream of a prehistoric pack that we're never gonna get. Alright, so then it's time to get the education in, a little bit of seating. And of course, in order to make all of this work, we need to go into facilities, and we need to get one of these hand-washing hygiene stations. So we have a small one here, and we have the very large one, And I think these are designed so that way you can hook them up in like a circle thing. And that's fine, but I think maybe just one or two spread about, especially near the entrances. I think that will make the most sense. So let's get in. We don't want bins, but what we do want are these security signs that say do not feed the animals. Let's get some donation bins in, if I can find one. There it is. And of course we're going to need some education. I really don't use these animal talk points very often, but this seems like a good place to use them. So I think this little corner might be a good stop-off point. And we'll just dot these around the main pathway. And hopefully they won't be too stressful for our routes. That's going to be another thing that I need to keep an eye on, is that the noise from the speakers can sometimes stress them out. Now, it hasn't happened to me in like years, but I've also been very specific in like managing where all the sound goes in my zoo. So we'll see. Now, if we wanted some good, like, ambiance or whatever, I could probably add in some of those little, like, nature sound speakers. I've heard that they help, maybe, with stress, but I think that might just be a rumor. I don't actually know. What is going to help with stress, though, before I completely forget, is going to be enrichment. So I think a grazing feeder ball, or, what else do we have for food? It's the ball and the hanging feeder. I think the ball would be a lot of fun. Like, I don't know that the guests will actually interact with it, but I can imagine them, like, rolling the ball to the kangaroo and the kangaroo kicking it back. And, like, I know that that's, like, not going to happen, but, I mean, I like to imagine. I'm gonna add in a couple of these sprinklers. And as much as they are for the kangaroo's benefit, they're actually gonna be for our guests. And I think just a small ice ball. We're not on hard difficulty, so I don't expect them to, like, run into difficulties, but just in case. Let me make sure that I haven't... Yeah, we've got just a little bit too much plantage. I think I can reduce it just a hair. I think maybe some of this can go. And we're just on that edge. What is causing us problems? So some of our crimson turkey bushes are. Let's see if maybe we can move those out, and that'll help. Yep, that was all we needed. Alright, let's check our welfare. Looks like the only thing is nutrition. And then, of course, we need to fix all of our, like, work zones and all that kind of stuff. But for right now, let's at least get the animals back in. Yep, done some research on the otters. That's good. Yes, I'm fully aware about the setup. I'm aware. While they're fixing that, I'll do the work zone. Should be entrance zone. Yes. So that building, and you. And that should fix that. And already people are flooding in, and they are making a point of not using the walkway. Alright, let's see how our Roo is doing. Absolutely having a sprint. Looks like we don't quite have enough food enrichment. That's easy to fix. And like that, it's a madhouse. Oh, goodness. Yes, I know they're having to queue. That's fine. But, you know what? Oh, and we're starting to get some mating behaviors, which means that our roos are just fine. So with that being said, I think that this is where I'm going to call it, simply because, I mean, like, we're running out of space. We can do a little bit of manicuring through here, and I will get to that at some point. And I can start to pick out some of these little individual details of, like, where I want certain things to go. Maybe add some of our canopies back in that we used and moved over here, so that way the guests can have some coverage as they go through. I think I want to add that back in, but those are all the little details that I'll do just in order to manicure a space. But yeah, so this has been refurbishing one of my old zoos. I hope you all have enjoyed. If you guys, I don't know, if you guys enjoy this style, and we'll see how that goes, because I mean, I took a long break, and so it's going to be quiet here on the channel, for even more quiet than it usually is for a little while, and that's okay. So maybe if this gets traction, or maybe, you know, I'll just decide, hey, I like doing this kind of thing, and I'll just start refurbishing some of my own zoos on camera and posting that. I don't know, we'll find out. Either way, I hope that this has been some kind of fun and maybe possibly inspirational for you guys to go back and revisit some of your old zoos and give your hand to trying to update some old things. You know, we've still got some work to do. We never really messed with our pronghorns. Our poor armadillo, like, this habitat is sad. But, you know, we've gotten to a point now where I think that all of the main ideas are in, and it's starting to come together in more of a cohesive direction than we had previously. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you guys have a lovely week, and I will see you next time.